Welcome to the Mike Litton Experience Podcast. Mike has over 31 years experience in real estate, finance, and investing. He's passionate about being a father, a teacher, a realtor, an investor, and a leader. Everyone has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. And now, introducing the host of the Mike Litton Experience, Mike Litton.
So what can you expect from the Mike Litton Experience? You can expect stories that will inspire, motivate, advice that will sharpen your focus, and expert information on real estate, finance, and market conditions. Marco Torres, thank you so much for being our guest on the Mike Litton Experience. I'm super excited for our time together. Like we talked about before we hit record, everybody has a story, and our passion is to help them tell it. So with your permission, we're going to have you start with where you were born, go all the way up to today. And then we want to talk about what you're working on for today and or tomorrow, okay?
Sounds great.
Excited to have you here, bud. So where were you born?
I was born in San Antonio, Texas, with Mexican descendants, family from Monterrey, Mexico originally, and then I guess I'm third generation born in Texas. But then I grew up in Puerto Rico, so my dad was transferred to Puerto Rico, so I'm probably the only Chicano Rican you're ever going to meet. So
Chicano Rican, there you go. So my in-laws were born in Puerto Rico, both of them. Their parents were born in Spain, both sides. And then my wife was born on Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, the naval base.
oh wow, okay.
So yeah,
up there.
So all my kids are crazy Ricans, right?
Yeah, right.
So you grew up in Puerto Rico. What was your favorite thing about growing up in Puerto Rico?
You know what? It was really quite an amazing youth. I was blessed to grow up in the Caribbean. Couple of things. One, I think one of the coolest things was I was kind of, even though my last name is Torres and I'm Hispanic Mexican, it was too cool to be gringo over there. I came in, growing up in Texas, speaking all English, went to Puerto Rico and then private schools and what have you. And that, that had American teachers. And so there was a mix of Puerto Ricans and Americans in the school. And it was too cool to be, gringo. We were the girls liked us better. So I never had a motivation to learn Spanish. I'm like, dude, this is too cool to be hanging out with the gringo kids. We could go to the hotels on the beaches in the tourist area and blend right in, sneak into the pool areas, swimming, diving off the boards with the tourists. And as long as we were speaking English real good, we could blend right in and act like tourists ourselves and hang out for free.
So you could get away with anything, right?
Yeah, it was too cool. So yeah, growing up, it was surfing, it was the beaches, it was the mountains of Puerto Rico. It was gorgeous. And then yeah, we can go on from there. I'll let you ask any questions you got.
Okay. So growing up, who was the most influential person to you?
Well, I'd have to say originally my father. He, very and my mother, but I mean there was no handouts in my household. There was no weekly allowance. I became an entrepreneur at a very early age because I wanted a Schwinn bike, and my dad said, well, you can wait for Christmas or your birthday and maybe you'll get one, or you can go earn some money and buy your own, and you'll appreciate it even more. And I'm like, well, how do we do that? So he suggested I get a paper route. And back then, we had to, I had to knock on doors and sell the subscriptions. I had to go back and collect the money because there was no auto payment systems back in those days.
Right. Yeah.
Internet payments. It was go collect the cash or check. And so I had to learn how to have manual spreadsheets. Back then, before Excel, there was these huge, spreadsheets, green, kids wouldn't know what that is today. There were all these little columns on a nice big green spreadsheet of document. And I had to keep my client learn from my dad, how do I keep all these customer names, keep track of when they, who owes me what, when they paid, when they haven't, stopped delivery because, they're past due and not paying. and then I learned to leverage. He handed me books, my dad, early on. You want to learn how to sell? I was reading Zig Ziglar's, series of sales books and closing and what have you at 9 and 10, and How to Win Friends and Influence People by Napoleon Hill and what have you. It was like, I'll be, again, an early entrepreneur, and I built the biggest paper route the San Juan Star in Puerto Rico had ever seen. I was featured on the front page of the newspaper by age 12 as having built the biggest route they'd ever seen. And part of what I did back then too was leveraged relationships. I didn't realize it at the time, but it was leveraging partnerships. I had some of my best friends helping me deliver the papers in the morning at 5 a.m. so that I could focus on doing what I like best, which turned out to be knocking on doors, selling subscriptions, and collecting the money. So built a big route, eventually sold it, and focused on high school football and what do you call it, Pee Wee football and stuff. So, but later on, that's kind of how that fun was. And my mom and dad were both very entrepreneurial spirit. That's why we ended up in Puerto Rico. My dad was the first from our Hispanic family to ever leave San Antonio. That most of my family cousins are all still there 50 years later, and so he took a gamble and went with the company to go head up General Electric Credit in the Caribbean. And so I got to, and the cool thing about being American at the time or American, Puerto Ricans are American too, but the gringo version within the island. At the time, there was a whole lot of Americans transferred to Puerto Rico to run all kinds of American companies that were there with tax breaks. So you had all the pharmaceutical companies, you had all kinds of companies moving to Puerto Rico to set up shop and employ Puerto Ricans and save a whole bunch on taxes. And so the heads of all these companies were typically the Anglo whites and what have Americans. And then there was a whole birth of private high schools to serve all of that community. And there was a whole birth of, the tourism industry was booming. I'm recently reading a book, The Rum Diaries. It's written that Johnny Depp was the main actor in that movie, all about that explosion of growth in Puerto Rico and the San Juan Star newspaper that I was a part of. So it's kind of a cool book. I recommend anybody looking for a good novel based on truth to go read that book.
That's cool. So in high school, did you have a favorite subject?
I sucked in high school. I sucked at studies. I barely got through high school with C's and D's. Actually had failed Spanish in my senior year and had to take summer school to get my diploma. And
with the last name Torres, you failed Spanish.
I failed Spanish. And so I'm not proud of that.
That is too funny.
But it explains more about how I grew from that into the future. Today I'm very bilingual and speak Spanish, almost perfectly. But I had nobody ever gave me a reason to care, to bother, to learn, to pay attention, in class. It just seemed like so, unnecessary. Then I even went off to college, and that sucked too. I started to have a desire there. Okay, I gotta figure out what I want to do for a living. I gotta, start making. As I studied electronics and tried to get something, an electrical degree. At the end of the day, I dropped out of college, convinced my mother and my older brother, who did complete college, and to open them, let's get into the Mexican food business. My mom, Mexican, she could cook up a storm, and she always was throwing parties, very socialite, and had every time she threw a party, it was a huge Mexican buffet of guacamole, tamales, and enchiladas, and everything else, and everybody loved her food. So I said, let's open a Mexican restaurant. And my mother got excited, my brother got excited, my dad laughed at us. Said, you guys don't know anything about restaurant business. If you really want to do it, you got to prove it. So my brother and I, again, inspiration from my dad, he says, you guys need to go, because in Puerto Rico there was no Mexican food restaurants at the time. So he said, you guys need to go to San Antonio, stay living with your uncle Alex, and go work for every Mexican restaurant. Of course, the home of the best Mexican Tex-Mex food in San Antonio He's amazing. So we went there and lived with my uncle and went to work in a bunch of different Mexican restaurants, and we'd pick up all kinds of late night shifts so we could go in there with little Kodak cameras and take photos of everything under the moon and take notes. And essentially we were funnel hacking before there was such a thing, because instead of buying a franchise that we had looked into, it was way too expensive. We said, let's go emulate, let's go learn, let's go copy paste, and so we went to work at a bunch of different Mexican restaurants, put together our own ideas and concepts, and eventually opened up a restaurant in San Juan at the biggest. We sold our way into the most successful, one of the most successful malls in North America, the Plaza Las Americas. And it was more successful than almost any other mall in the US, because it was in the center of the island, and there's over 4 million people on the island of Puerto Rico. And they would all make a pilgrimage at least once a month to the mall, so, and This was the first food court in Puerto Rico was in that mall. So we got in there with a restaurant, and the day we opened up, we had lines of 100 people long, and we killed it. Before, we had 5 restaurants in 5 years after that, and that went well. And then I had a nightclub. By the time I was 23, I owned 5 restaurants with my family and a nightclub on my own by the time I was 23 years old.
Wow. Wow. So when did you start the Mexican restaurant? How old were you? 18?
I was going on 20, 19 going on 20.
There you go. Okay.
By the time we opened the first restaurant, 1979. That's when we opened, and then we opened a full service restaurant in St. Thomas, U.S. Virgin Islands. We had these guys come and cater, and I went to St. Thomas with them, and they wined and dined me all over the island. And I came back and sold the rest of the family that we needed to open up a full service Mexican restaurant in St. Thomas, Charlotte Amalia, overlooking the harbor and the tourist area, the cruise ships. So we opened that restaurant. It took us a year and a half or so to open that one. But, luckily we had a lot of successes early on. And then eventually we sold some of the fast food courts. 7 years later, we sold them to Taco Bell when they wanted into Puerto Rico, and we had the lockdown on the food courts in some of the major malls. So that's what they bought. So we got out at a good time as well. By the time we got out, we were burned out on the food and beverage business. I eventually wanted nothing to do with it.
Time to take a break, right?
Yeah.
So you sell to Taco Bell, then where do you go?
I had my nightclub, and I eventually sold that as well. The nightclub business is fickle, right? You've got a 3 to 5 year span typically when the youth will be, coming to your place. And then you either got to shut it down, rename it, come up with a new theme, reopen, or slowly die. You're typically in the not always, sometimes bars can last for decades, but we had a big blowout. I ended up on the second page of the bloodiest newspaper in Puerto Rico. We had a riot break out inside the club one night. Huge guy, and long story short, had a big riot. It spilled out onto the street. Cops everywhere. I was lifted up off the ground by this huge wrestler, and was hanging up. And he had me up, grabbed me by the neck, picked me a couple feet up off the ground. But it was just a big mess. At the end of the day, the club never was the same after that, and I couldn't. No matter what I did, I couldn't bring the crowd back in. So I sold my half of that to my partner, and 6 months later, he was out of business, and I was. I took a year sabbatical. I think I was 25, 26. I took a year sabbatical, sailed all over the Caribbean. Felt like I'm invincible. The day I get ready to go back to work, I'll be able to strike up and make money again, no problem. But typical life, right? When I was ready to get back into the work business, it wasn't so easy.
Right.
It wasn't so easy to get back on top. And I ended up becoming the food and beverage director of the Sands Hotel and Casino. I was general manager of a beautiful high-end steak and seafood restaurant at the El San Juan Hotel and Casino. If anybody knows Puerto Rico, these are the two of the best hotels on the strip. And that lasted for a few years, and then I decided to move my family to Florida, and that was a whole new venture there.
Where in Florida?
Originally moved to Orlando. My wife and I, when I got married in Puerto Rico, we would visit friends in Orlando, and we wanted to start a family, but Puerto Rico is kind of chaos at the time. It still is. We'd go to Orlando, we'd see everybody, and it's all stop at the red light, and people follow the rules, and the roads were all clean and beautiful. And you'd go into Disney and everything's all gorgeously landscaped, and people would stay in lines, waiting for their turn for the next ride. And we're thinking, heck, if we were Puerto Rico, this would be a nut house. Everybody would be trying to cut in front of the other to get in the line and, bring their friends up to the front of the line. And, we Puerto Ricans, I tell you, we break every rule, and we try to anyway. We're like, these rules are meant for everybody but us.
Yeah. I love it.
And so here we were, in Orlando, and everything's like, people, in Puerto Rico, you don't stop for a red light, you slow down, And so, here we are in Orlando again. Everything is, it just looked like this is where we wanted to grow a family. So we moved and joined our friends in Orlando. That's where we had our 2 kids, and spent the next, I've been in Florida ever since. I currently live down in Southwest Florida on the water. I like boating and sailing, so I got to be near the ocean. So
there you go. So what was the single most important thing that you learned owning the Mexican restaurants?
I didn't learn it until afterwards, actually, believe it or not. And what I learned afterwards is the customer is not always right. When I was in the restaurant business, I had the philosophy, and maybe it was good, maybe it was bad, but my food and beverage background in the hotel industry is the customer is always right, which led me to burn out on the restaurant business because I began to not like people. In other words, the demands people make on staff, on waiters, on restaurant people, it just made me start to actually not like other human beings.
Yeah. Oh, I understand.
And so later on in life, when I got into different businesses, actually, and my first job when I came to Orlando, this is a good story. When I first came to Orlando, Florida, I went to work for an Italian restaurant. I didn't want to be in the restaurant business, but that's one thing I knew. And so I figured I'll be a waiter, and I want to be a waiter at a high-end restaurant where I can make big tips while I find some other career to start and learn something new. Right. So I'm working at nights in this high-end Italian restaurant, and I'm serving this couple, and one of them orders grouper, one orders snapper with the same sauce. And when I delivered, the guys coming and yelling, this is not grouper. And the owner happens to come by, and again, this is really high-end Italian restaurant. The owner happened to be right nearby. He heard the guy saying, this is not grouper. He walks over there, looks at the plate. I wasn't even sure if I put the plates down wrong, maybe, or something, And but the owner looked at the plate, and he went off on this guy. He goes, and with an Italian accent, you were calling me a liar. I get here at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'm the one who buys the fish, and that is the grouper. You calling me a liar? He went off on this guy, and he finally said, you know what? Get the F out of here.
We reserve the right to refuse service, right?
Absolutely. and the customer's like, no, it's okay. He goes, no, it's not okay. You get up and you get out. I don't want your business now or ever. He kicked him out of the restaurant. Everybody else in the restaurant was silent, Then from then on, you go from table to table. How's everything? Oh, it's very good, very good. Yeah. But what I learned from that man to this day was, you know what? You don't have to put up with it, because if you know you're right as the business owner, and if you know your product and service is on the mark, and he did. I mean, this guy was a professional to the T. I mean, we had to start that day showing our fingernails, military lineup. He wanted to make sure all the staff was perfect. I mean, he ran his restaurant like a general. So he knew that was grouper without a question of a doubt, and he's the one that bought and filleted the fish every morning.
That's right.
So the point is, I would have been taught, my previous thought would have been, oh, I'm so sorry, sir. Let me take that plate. I'll get you another one, whatever. Your customer's always right. When you're walking back to the kitchen, you're mumbling under your breath that this customer is driving you nuts. But anyway, the lesson I learned from him was, the customer's not always right. And as the business owner, you have the choice to sometimes fire your client.
Yeah.
And that changed my whole philosophy on business. It allowed me to go back to loving people. It allowed me to go back to serving clients and customers and what have you, and doing so on a win-win relationship. In other words, if it's not a win for you, it's not a win for me. And guess what? If it's not a win for me, then maybe we should part ways.
Yeah.
And I'm going to do everything in my power to make everything right, but I'm not going to bend over backwards. I'm not going to give it to you for free. I'm not going to break my ethics or what have you to just because the customer is always right.
Well, think about the signal that it sends to your employees, though, right? Because you've got a customer, that customer is going to be there, they're going to come in, they're going to eat their grouper, they're going to pay, and they're going to leave. But that employee is going to be there for a while, right? Now, some of them, in the restaurant business, they don't stay forever, but the time that they're there, you're showing loyalty to them, right? And you're showing them by example how to lead. And that's a big deal. That's a big lesson that you learned that I think probably has helped you a lot going forward, right? Because when you're leading a group of people, it's more about what you do than it is about what you say, right? And you have opportunities every day to show your loyalty. You have opportunities every day to show your leadership. You have opportunities every day to show what you're made of, and you're either going to do it or you're not, right? And they're looking to you for leadership. So that's, the whole idea of going to San Antonio and working in these different Mexican restaurants. I love that. I absolutely love that as a life lesson for people, right? Because the wheel doesn't have to be reinvented, right? You can go and figure out what works best, take the best practices, and then go out and replicate them.
Absolutely.
Learn from people who are successful at it. So I think that's incredibly important as a lesson for people. And also the fact that, there are people that will come to a public place or come and they'll use a service, right? That they're having a tough time in their life. Let's be honest. And if they kick their dog, they go to jail. If they kick their wife, they go to jail, right? If they yell at their wife or they're ugly to their wife's going to change the locks in the house, right? So what outlet do they have? Well, when they take it out on somebody that they don't know in public unfairly, right? The best thing you can do in terms of integrity is call them on it.
Mm-hmm.
You're out of here,
You're
right? You're wrong. You're out of here. Don't come back.
Right.
So that's a
when you previously, I wouldn't have done that. I would have, and so your employee, like you said, said, I know I did right by this client, and here you are backing the client, making me feel like maybe.
We hope you enjoyed another episode of the Mike Litton Experience. If you did, do us a favor, smash that subscribe button, tell your friends, family, and coworkers about our program, and wherever you get your podcasts, please leave us a rating. It helps us to connect with quality people just like you.
And that's a wrap. Another episode of the Mike Litton Experience in the books. Reach out to Mike on Instagram at Litton Realty. Want to meet with Mike? Check out Calendly.com/Rio760.